Hi, it's Tim, freshly back from vacation. Thanks to some good timing by Koom, we do have an all-new episode for you this week. It's his interview with Ben Wickey, an artist, writer, filmmaker, animator, and voice actor. His soon-to-be-released graphic novel is More Weight, a Salem Story, which is a deep dive into the Salem witch trials, what really happened, who was to blame, and how the city of Salem, Massachusetts has dealt with its legacy, or not. First, as always, I'd like to thank our patrons for helping to keep the show going. You can pitch in by pledging at least $2 a month at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics.
So we're here talking to Ben Wickey in California. Where in LA are you?
I am in beautiful downtown Burbank.
Oh, awesome. And that's because you worked on films like Marcel the Shell with Shoes and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's pretty much where all the studios are. So we're kind of in the hub of the ever-imploding industry right now.
That's great. Are you working on something right now?
Just freelance working with other stop motion studios when I get the chance. My wife is a storyboard artist who works mostly in 2D animation, so we're making it work out here.
Okay, awesome. So we're here primarily to talk about More Weight, your new book from Top Shelf. I just finished reading it a few days ago. Tell us, how many pages is it?
With the very large appendix of research notes and citations and all that at the end, it's 530 pages. Wow. So it's about 500 without that.
And you've been working on it for about 10 years off and on, is that correct?
Pretty much, yeah. It was sort of my passion project, the thing that I would be working on in the back. I would always have it on the back burner. I'd always be working on it in the background when I wasn't making films or things like that. Yeah.
Cool. And you grew up, well, first of all, we should say a little bit about what the book is about. It's sort of an interrogation of the Salem witch trials from 1692. And you really look at the legacy of those witch trials and how Salem has dealt or not dealt with its legacy of those shameful events. As far as I understood it, there are sort of three distinct sections that you sort of toggle back between. There are the events around 1692, which are the trials themselves. There's a very long, protracted, actually two long, protracted discussions between Nathaniel Hawthorne, who is a descendant of Judge Hawthorne from those trials, and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, America's celebrated poet, who ended up writing a play as part of two plays about that historical time, but one deals with the trials. And the title of the book, More Weight, is something that Giles Corey said when he was pressed to testify and refused to do so. And so they literally did press him down with rocks. And at least in your version of the book, this is his way of making atonement or penance for the things that he'd done to get his wife into trouble before himself. And so he endures the pain as a way to martyr himself, let's say, and keeps on saying more weight as a way of refusing to confess or atone or testify. Would you like to add anything else to that?
No, that's a really great way.
I forgot the third segment is the present, Salem in the present, especially around Halloween. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, that's a great way that's a great preamble. Thank you, Koom. Yes, whether or not Giles Corey actually said more weight is kind of up for debate. It is kind of a local legend. It may have actually come from a John Milton poem. But if you look at the records of who Giles Corey was, and if you look at how he refused 3 times to put himself on trial. It's not like he didn't. He pleaded innocent to the very last. He just refused to cooperate at his arraignment and stand trial, and that's why he was pressed to death. Yeah, it's a very bleak story. It's one of those stories that you always hear. When I was growing up and going to middle school, I went to a middle school in Danvers, which is pretty much where Salem Village used to be in 1692 when all of this started. And so, of course, the closest places we would have for field trips would be, the closest museums would be Salem. We'd go to Salem. And so we'd go to all the wax museums and things like that. And I remember standing under this kind of diminutive yet towering Danny DeVito-sized wax figure of Giles Corey, just thinking, who the heck was this guy? This was a very interesting character, and actually going into the actual documents from the 1640s into the 1680s, you find that he got away with practically everything, even maybe murder. And he was murdered for the invisible and made-up crime of witchcraft, which, of course, he never did. So it's kind of an interesting irony there. It's a really big story. I wanted to tell kind of the story of Salem, tell the story of how, to do a historically accurate portrayal of what happened in 1692, and get the dates and the locations and the people correctly, without, and of course, comics is the way of doing that. You can have such a big canvas of time and locations. And I tried to design every person, to look, recognizable, so that you could kind of, they're not just 17th century. Everyone's named Mary and John and things like that. It's hard to kind of keep track of so many people. So it's good to draw people distinctly, and to remind people that these were real people, that these were people who, yes, they had made, they had buckles on their shoes, but they still had all the human characteristics that we all have: jealousy, hatred, love, joy, what have you. And with comics being such a pop culture medium, I had never really seen a book or anything that in which modern Salem and the past were existing in the same place, where the agonies and true, the real horrific acts that were perpetrated on these people can exist within the same book as, all of the stuff that you would find today in Salem, with tourism and that kind of thing. I don't think people who come to Salem are really consider themselves as part of that history when they come to the city. To them, I think history happens in a vacuum. And this book is kind of a way of saying, no, you're part of this, you're part of this history, part of this legacy. I'm going to put you in the same book as these people, and you are now, in amber. And as well as, Hawthorne and Longfellow, to say, yes, what happened in Salem actually had consequences. You look at the Crucible, you look at lots of versions in pop culture, movies or TV. It always ends with people being hanged and people going, oh, maybe they weren't witches, and they get sad and they go home, and that's the end. But no one really talks about what that means, what the legacy, the consequences are on American history, why it's relevant, especially today in these despotic times, at least in the Longfellow Hawthorne scenes, it's the 1860s. It's the perfect kind of midpoint between today and the 17th century. So we're not wildly and violently, going back and forth between. We have actually something to ground this journey from time period to time period, and to look at actually how American culture and literature could be shaped by the past, the Gothic tradition of literature and that kind of thing. That's my very rambling answer
Yeah,
to
well,
that very simple question.
you've touched on a lot of the things that I do want to get at in the interview. And you can consider me, if you want, a test case, an early test case of what impact the book has had, or whether it's had the impact that you wanted. Because, like I said to you in an email, it really did make me rethink my slim connection or connection to that folklore, that mythology, because I've visited Salem briefly, very briefly,
Yeah.
and I am interested in the history of witches, which is sort of why I made you suffer and read the short story I wrote, but not that
No,
it
it was
has a
great. It was a fun read.
to your book, but it just kind of shows you a kind of tangent. Or like another thing we could discuss is Eggers's film The Witch. What's his first
Mm.
name? Robert Eggers'
Robert
film The
Eggers,
Witch.
yeah.
Yeah, because I think that's a really interesting document that, or a work that kind of looks at this kind of tension between, let's say, imagination and rationality in the context of those Puritan times. But like you say, we never really kind of empathize with the Puritans in that film. We're always looking at them from outside through a
Yeah.
very thick glass, through a very dark glass, right? Through a glass darkly. And you do something else, which is, I think, you really try to empathize with them in a way that I haven't really seen before. It's been a long time since I've read The Crucible, but I don't think The Crucible does that either. It works as an analogy that's much more relevant to the McCarthy times than it, is
Mm.
a document of what happened. Like you say in your book, even after Arthur Miller visits the site later on, he still refuses to kind of acknowledge the actual historical aspect of it. So anyway, I'm rambling too. Let me ask you, what was your sense of all of this growing up in Beverly and visiting your friends in Salem? Like, did you have sort of something more aligned with the popular conception of that mythology and history, or were you always kind of skeptical and troubled by it?
No, it's funny. I was like a lot of people, I just didn't ask the questions, and I don't really. It's not like I have any contempt or blame for people that don't ask questions. I don't think it's really a city that encourages you to ask questions. If you're just a visitor and you've only got a few days in the city, you don't want to be questioning everything. You just want to have a good time and see what there is to see.
I mean, I
Um,
was just there for a few hours, but what you
yeah,
say in the book really hit home. I was like, oh my God, this is so touristy. I was not expecting this. I was expecting something a bit more historical. And it was only from walking out of the town center that I could start to feel that a little bit, especially as the evening kind of crept up. And,
yeah,
all of that hubbub kind of died away a little.
yeah. It's the Witch City brand that the city has had really since about the 1860s, but it's sort of snowballed into a thing that I'm really not sure if the city is large enough or has enough resources to, you know, to withstand. I mean, there are a lot of people who, I mean, I think like 1.3 million people came to the city last year. I mean, it's a city that's really small. I mean, it was developed and designed in the 17th century. Um, the roads haven't really changed that much in terms of like planning, and the Puritans were notoriously not very good at city planning. So um,
And
it is kind of
forgive my ignorance, but the Salem that's hyper touristy, that's Salem town, not Salem village, which was the epicenter of the witch trials.
so it began. Yeah, I should say it began in Salem Village, which is now the town of Danvers. And there were it was a rural setting of more rural people, more. I mean, they're all Puritans, but they're a bit more um, extreme in their Puritanism. And for about 20 years or more, Salem town, which is now the city of Salem, had been exerting socioeconomic pressures onto Salem Village. And so there was a lot of factions. And we have this idea with the witch trials that if we learn about it at all in school or whatever, usually we think of like the first Thanksgiving, we think of happy little pilgrims, and then oh no, it's witches. It's a hysteria. We don't even need to look into what caused it. It's a hysteria. It's a random thing with no cause. Oh, and then of course the Enlightenment came and blah blah blah. No, this was a New England at that time was so fearful and so fraught with change and so war torn and so factional and split up and paranoid and suffering that they were already pre-existing conditions that were just exasperated when the supernatural is introduced. All you need is that it sets that one little spark to set the entire hay bale ablaze, by just saying witch.
But I mean, there's a real history of that in England to begin with. You
Yeah.
allude to it when Giles remembers being a kid in Northamptonshire and seeing some kind of witch hanging or something. And
Yeah.
correct me if I'm getting this wrong, under James the First, he really believed in people being possessed, witches. There was a witch finder general called Matthew, Hopkins, something like that.
Hopkins in the 1640s. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
he made a ton of money just saying people were witches up and down the country. And so that lore was already there. It was often older women, although I
Yep.
think it was younger women too. They'd often take like a sighting of a black dog, which I'm sure is a very common thing, or just somebody getting ill or something like that to say, so and so's a witch. You lock them up, you kill them, you take away their land.
Yeah.
These kind of usurious or petty human faults, like you say,
Yeah.
are lived out by the practice.
Yeah.
So there was a whole history of that I think sort of came over with the Puritans, at least subconsciously, to Plymouth Rock and spread.
I think wherever there is huge periods of change, in very bad economic situations, where what happened in Salem, and in England, it really came at the same time as the rise of capitalism and proto-capitalism, which is very interesting if you consider what these people were saying about the devil. You've got these rural, mistreated workers, farmers, people, in Salem Village, accusing people in Salem Town and going, the devil appeared to me and promised me sundries, promised me nice French shoes and fancy goods and shiny things. That, I think that all was, and I'm not the first, of course, to say that. Bauer and Nissenbaum in the 70s, I think, were the first people to go, hey, I think the rise of capitalism really played a really big hand. as well, the socioeconomic pressures, of course, and strife and all that. That was, it was kind of a perfect storm of these kinds of things. But of course, this is what we still see in parts of the world. There's places in Africa and in India where, the same thing is happening. People are being, as we speak, accused of witchcraft or dragged from their homes screaming and lynched in the town square for the same mundane, dumb reasons that they were in the West.
That was another thing that your book really made me. I knew about the killings of women in India. I didn't know it was through the lens that they were practicing witchcraft. So that was new to me. I knew that in the continent of Africa, this is something that's perennially been a problem, but I sort of knew of it from the other side, which is that local people are manipulating other tribes people and their neighbors by exploiting them, saying, I'll remove the hex or the witchcraft from you for such and such money. But once again, you really kind of brought light to the injustice of how this is very much still happening today and how irrational we still are.
Yeah, well, I think it's important that people in the West look at our, brothers and sisters, our fellow creatures, our fellow human beings across the Atlantic and go, oh, their present nightmare used to be ours. And we take our enlightenment thinking for granted by putting this kind of shroud of mythology over what is sometimes called the burning times. This idea that there used to be real witches, or 9 million real witches that were burned at the stake. They were actually hanged, and it wasn't 9 million, anywhere close to that number, and they weren't real witches. But I think there's this kind of, I look at Salem and I don't see many people walking around the witch city talking about how people right now, as we're talking, are undergoing the same torturous, horrific deaths that people in the West used to, for the same exact reasons: for land theft, for jealousies, for petty, rivalries. Oh, this woman refused my sexual advances. Well, because the word witch has always just been, its function has always been, or at least its development throughout Christianity has always been as just a really convenient way of disposing of people you don't like. You don't have to go through any big, court thing. It's just a way. It's an easy way of relieving the pressure off of you.
Yeah, I also
letting off steam.
go ahead.
No, it's just letting off steam through senseless violence. Yeah, go ahead.
Also got the feeling that you're drawing a connection to what's happening in America now, especially with ICE raids and the vilification of migrants. I think the age of reason is long gone, if it ever existed truly. And we are living in very hysterical times, let's say. And you don't, like, there's a lot in your book that you hit on the head square and you reinforce and reinforce and restate. But this, I think you were being a bit more coy about, or sly about, where I think you're alluding to that as well, as opposed to just somewhere far away, like in India or Africa. Do you want to talk about that at all, or?
Well, I did start. We had already had terrible despotic things with the first Trump presidency, like the Muslim ban and things like that. But I finished the book just before all this stuff with ICE raids and things were happening.
Right.
How rich is it for this president of ours to be shouting the word witch hunt all the time, and yet he is perpetrating, literally, actually, he's actually having people's homes invaded.
Sure.
This is a guy who, when he was first, impeached, wrote a letter to Nancy Pelosi complaining about it, and in a single paragraph sentence, it can't be taken out of context, a single paragraph sentence wrote, "More due process was given to those accused in the Salem witch trial." And this is a president. Gore Vidal was right. We really do live the United States of amnesia. We don't remember our history. We don't learn from the past.
I wouldn't be surprised if somebody else wrote that line for him. Like, I have trouble believing that he'd remember something as specific as the Salem witch trial, or that women were unjustly hanged as a result of that. But let me roll it back a little bit, get to some of my questions.
Sure.
I know from reading your other interviews that you worked on it for about 10 years off and on. You're 30 years old, which to me is like incredibly young to have finished such a massive tome. Remember, 530 pages, including annotations. So I want to ask, what did you want to be first, an animator or like a paper cartoonist? And what were your influences?
Oh, it's funny. I grew up in a very encouraging household, very artistic household. My mom is an arts therapist and a fine art painter, and is also a Henson trained puppeteer.
What does she think of your stuff?
What does she think of my stuff? I know. No, she's very proud of me. She likes what I do. It's very different, of course, from what each of my parents does. My dad is also proud of me, but he's also a hand drawn animator and cartoonist. And I think they were both surprised that I was going to do something so dark.
Yeah, I was about to say your mom could analyze the hell out of the
Sure.
subject matter that you cover, whether it's your animation or your comics.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, no, we've always had just a very fun-loving, artsy household of, very surreal, coming up with funny things. And so it was kind of a shock to them, like, oh, you're doing a graphic novel about something this heavy? No pun intended, more way. But this, the heavy in subject matter, are you sure, But it's not like they weren't supportive, I have to say. They were very supportive, even if I had a hard time articulating what I was doing, because the book evolved over 10 years. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know that I had that much to say about it as I went along.
Not only that, but we change and grow a lot from 20 to 30. We really kind of, become adults really during that decade. So you must have like significantly gone through life. I know you got married, for example, but that's just a minor example. And you moved across the country. But what kind of stuff did your dad animate?
He animates. We always do just projects for ourselves. Just out of the fun of it. We write little cartoons and animate it or draw it. And he wrote a really funny book called The Brewer Brothers that he self-published. It's really great. Just that he illustrated and wrote. It's hilarious. And my mom wrote some children's book about our cats at the time, named Spoos, A Place for Spoos, it's called, and the sequel, Food for Spoos. So both of my parents had already had books, so I kind of thought, well, where's mine? I need a book too, and I over-delivered, I guess.
So you draw in like different styles also in your graphic novel, which is incredible. So these are the kinds of artistic influences that I picked up, and you tell me if I'm close or way off the mark. Okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So the parts in 1692 are drawn the most cartooniest. And I think those are the ones most influenced by Edward Gorey, whom I know you like. So I think that's an easy one to identify.
Absolutely.
Which I want to come back to that a little bit later. But okay, so other people I could kind of see is like, to me, it seemed like the farthest back in history you go, the more cartoony you get. I don't know if that was intentional, but like the stuff in 1692 are the most caricaturish, the most cartoony, even though that's where the most grimmest things are happening. And I didn't know if that was because if you go further back in history, the less realistic it becomes because it's harder to be accurate. Plus, there is that idea, mistaken or not, I don't know, that rationality kind of disintegrates the further back you go. But okay, so that's the Edward Gorey stuff. And then you get the parts in the 1860s with Nathaniel Hawthorne and Longfellow. And to me, that kind of reminded me a little bit of Brian Talbot's work. Like, are you influenced by him?
Yeah, sure. No one said that to me. That's really cool. Thank you. I take that as a compliment.
Even the stuff that's in the modern era in Salem, that reminds me a little bit of Tale of One Bad Rat, where, she's in the Lake District and he's using those very thick lines, and you've got the colors. Once again, the colors are different between the three parts too, which are very interesting and, conscious. But going back to the cartoonishness of the characters in the 1692 era, I could also see some Posey Simmons and Raymond Briggs.
Oh, Raymond Briggs, certainly. Yeah, Posey Simmons too. Not consciously, but I guess.
The women's faces, the girls especially. Yeah, I think so.
All these things get into your DNA, Yeah.
Is there anybody else like you're consciously drawing on that you can kind of really nail down?
Yeah, lots of illustrators. Tove Jansson, of course, who did Moomins, a fellow Finn. I can't, mention her.
Sorry, do you have Finnish origin?
My dad's side is Finnish. Yeah, I'm Italian and Finnish, so I have a very strange. Yeah,
I have a high school friend who's Finnish. She was actually thinking of moving there, She went from Canada to England. Right now, she's in Amsterdam, I think, if I'm not misremembering. So she
Oh
didn't
wow.
quite make it to Finland, but she's going in that general direction.
Yeah, she'll wind up there eventually. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Anyway, sorry, go on. So take
No, I
answer. Who else? Who else?
when I was growing up, I wanted to be E.H. Shepard, of course, who because I loved his work in The Wind in the Willows. Just I wanted to be a pen and ink artist. I wanted to be someone like, Ralph Steadman, Ronald Searle, of course,
Okay.
Charles Keeping. Um,
So a lot more illustrators, maybe even children's illustrators, as opposed to the kind of comics artists that a lot of people I interview normally will quote. People like
yeah,
Carmen, and, Ditko and all of those guys. Yeah.
yeah. I kind of well, I of course love Schultz and Bill Watterson and uh, the Belgian stuff, Asterix or Tintin or things like that. That
Sure.
was mostly the comics that I had. I didn't really have any superhero stuff. It didn't really interest me, and I think by the time I had some interest, I was too old. But um, yeah, a big book. I said this recently. It came out of my head. I hadn't really realized it until I was saying it out loud. It was Will Eisner's Moby Dick.
Which I
I
haven't seen at all.
It's great. It's
Is it
like
not
this.
like his other stuff?
It's basically just a kind of play-by-play
But
adaptation of.
is the cartoony style not like an Eisner thing? Or is
It's
it?
it, it's his cartoony style.
It's
It's
his
very
own style.
cartoony.
Okay.
Yeah, it's his own style. Um, but it's great because I grew up watching like film adaptions of Moby Dick, and I was like, oh, I want to read this book, and then I'd see it on the shelf, and it was this thick, and impenetrable,
Yeah.
and then my dad gave me Will Eisner's Moby Dick, and I thought, wow, you can do this with comics. You can turn this book into this book and still have it be. Of course, it doesn't have all the symbolism
Yeah.
that Mel has.
Except,
It's pretty much,
except you did the opposite. You took the Crucible, which is a slim volume, and you turned it into a massive thing.
yeah, Longfellow's. Yeah, I know. Yeah, but the funny thing is that some with the Salem witch trials. I mean, there are hundreds of stories you could tell.
Sure.
I mean, you could have 50 of these sized books.
Yeah, which brings me to an interesting question. You did mention seeing the Giles Corey wax statue, but why pick Giles Corey instead of your ancestor, Mary Eastie, who is probably a much more sympathetic figure? Your Giles Corey is not a likable character at all.
No, he's kind of like the worst and best he's like every Shakespearean character, all one
Yeah.
very
And
troubled
yet you
man.
spend so much time with him.
The simple reason for that is I didn't know that I was a descendant of Mary Esty until I was halfway through the book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
That
you
was
could have picked Giles
very
Corey's
weird.
wife or something like that. She seems much more dignified.
Yeah,
Um,
really the answer to that is there's just more documentation about him. You know,
right. I mean, the coolest part of him is how he dies. And sometimes people do rise to a kind of dignity in death that,
mm,
you know, like A Tale of Two Cities or something. But yeah, he just, like you said, I mean, in your book, you don't make any bones about it. You don't leave ambiguity. In your book, he knows he killed that person who was
yeah,
mentally challenged,
yeah,
out of pettiness, really, and doesn't even acknowledge it,
mm,
denies that he did it. Like, I mean, awful, awful man.
yeah,
And but oddly enough, like focusing on Giles is also what allowed you to, in some ways, connect with more in that kind of period when you weren't sure how to proceed. From what I read of you in your other interview, because you wrote him a letter. We're talking about Alan Moore here,
mm,
probably
mm,
both of our favorite comics writer, and
absolutely,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, favorite writer, period, for me. But, you wrote to him, and then he wrote a very encouraging letter and even gave you information on what Giles Corey would have experienced in Northamptonshire when he lived there before leaving
yeah,
for the new colonies. But Yeah, sorry, I didn't know where I was going. Do you want to talk about that? Was that just
Yeah,
pure fortuitousness, or do you think subconsciously maybe you were drawn to Corey because he was from Northamptonshire?
it's very strange because at the very beginning, all I wanted to do was uh, do something about. Yeah, I was interested in how Miller had of course portrayed Giles Corey. In high school, I had done a project, a little prompt where it's like, you know, make a document, like handwritten document from one of the characters of the Crucible, and I chose Giles Corey. So there was something about some interest I had. I had some interest in a person who is obviously flawed and who has obviously accused his own wife of witchcraft and then is himself accused. Like that to me was a very interesting story, very interesting dynamic. You don't really know what you're inflicting upon somebody until it's done to you. I thought that was very interesting. But at the beginning, all I wanted to do was to do a comic book version of Longfellow's play, which I discovered while, just doing Crucible homework in high school. And I thought, I didn't know that Longfellow wrote a plays, let alone one as bleak as that play. I mean, it's more bleak than really Hawthorne could even get. And Hawthorne's bleak, and pessimistic. And so all I wanted to do was, all right, I'll sit down and I'll do Longfellow's play, but just in comic book form. So I sit down and I draw, and I start to go, well, Giles Corey didn't live on the Ipswich River. He lived in what's now Peabody. All right, well, I'll change it to Crystal Pond. And, well, his oxen didn't drown in the lake. They just one of them ran off into the woods. All right, well, I'll change that. So I just started correcting Longfellow's, because, he only had one book. It was Charles Wentworth Upham's book from the 1860s. And of course, Longfellow wasn't out to do a historically accurate a play. He wanted to just do a fun play, and he wrote it very quickly in 1868. But he didn't have access to the stuff that we have now. We have so much more than Charles Wentworth Upham. We've got the amazing scholarship of Marilyn K. Roach or Emerson Baker or people like that, people who have spent decades of their lives doing unbelievable work. People like Margot Burns, a friend of mine. They're a historian and linguist who studied all the documents and all the handwriting and was able to figure out who wrote what, so they could figure out who was in what room when certain things were happening. Amazing work, amazing scholarship. These are the giants, by the way, that I am kind of perched with my little drawing pens on the shoulders of. I mean, these are really praiseworthy, great people.
And in the company of, you're really in their company, not in cartoonist company, I think, which is really interesting.
Well, I was telling all of them at the time, I was like, I'm not a historian. I'm just a cartoonist who cares. Like, I don't have, this kind of, I'm not putting on airs. I'm not, claiming that
But you've
I'm anything
become a
more.
historian in doing this. Like from what I read in your other interview, originally this was a much slimmer project. And I think maybe around the time that Moore encouraged you, it's become what it's become, like this 10-year labor.
Yeah. I don't know if it was an obsession. I just really wanted to get it right. Also, when I was seeing just the layers upon layers of bullshit since
Sure.
in the 333 years since, I mean, there's just so much BS to shovel, off of the facts. You got to dig deep, and the deeper you dig, the more stuff you find, and then you look for things like other things. And I was fortunate enough to be kind of doing the book the kind of the David McCullough way of researching as you write and as you draw, so that you're always working from a point of view of asking questions rather than doing all of your research at the beginning and then going, I know everything, don't
Right.
just take my word for it. No, I was doing everything with an inquiring eye because I wanted to get to the bottom of this as much as anybody. So yeah, started as just me trying to do Longfellow, and over the years, the bits that were Longfellow got very, very small, and the bits that were, me actually just poring over books and documents and all that became much bigger, and I found my own voice as a result. And then over the winter, I had lunch with my friend Margot Burns, whose opinion of the book I actually feared or was anticipating, sweating and more than people like Alan Moore, who of course I revere, because I really wanted the book to be approved by Margot. And at the end of the dinner, they were so sweet. They took me aside and said basically, like, you're one of us now. You're an expert now. Don't listen to anybody who says you're not an expert. You are an expert. And I felt that was the knighthood that I needed, or whatever, permission
Yeah.
to think of
So
myself in that way.
there's that in terms of the actual historical content. But if we look at the cartooning, I do see Moore's heavy influence on you. I see
Sure.
the thumbprints all over it, the fingerprints all over it, especially from Hell all over
Yeah.
that book. So in the section with Hawthorne and Longfellow, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, but given the conceptual nature of this book, no big deal. But towards the latter parts of that, they actually kind of move in time. I mean, there's always a kind of a thing in your graphic novel where you're flickering in time. You will
Yeah.
kind of recreate certain vistas in different times. In an older vista, there'll be seagulls above the wooden houses, and in the modern time, there'll be drones above all the
Correct.
tourist activity, but it's the same kind of geographical patch, more or less. But
Yeah.
anyway, they're actually able to move through, temporal dimensions, whether it's through speaking to ghosts,
Yep.
the House of the Seven Gables, which still stands, or they actually kind of move through time to see the poor people who are jailed and are awaiting their sentence and are suffering and
Yeah.
are able to kind of step into that time. And so that is very much like not just like Gull doing that, moving through time in From Hell, but also Moore himself kind of, and his ideas and his interest in psychogeography, where he moves through
Yeah.
history around Northamptonshire, right? And he actually but what's interesting is then you go to the last section of your book where you take a very, very, very rationalist stance, and you say, okay, it's great for women to believe in being witches and being Wiccan and in the burning times with 900 martyrs and all that, but that's got nothing to do with history. And you make a very strong case that both in the 1692 period of your book as well as in the modern period of the book, that there is no such thing as witchcraft, that this is either put upon other people or it's something that people claim in the present in order to scapegoat other people. But at the same time, the enterprise that you're doing, which is moving between times in this ghostly manner, this kind of transcendental or spectral kind of travel that you're doing actually kind of negates that rationalist kind of impulse. It seems to suggest that we do kind of live in a very porous time where times can bleed into each other.
Well, I mean, the scenes that were, without giving too much away of how the Hawthorne and Longfellow scenes end, these are very imaginative, writers, and I did want to have at least some aspect of the book that was through the Gothic lens, or through the lens of the Gothic literary tradition, which is that
Right.
you are in the present and the past is exerting its weight upon you and invading your life, spectrally. Um, I don't really. I'm trying to not spoil how those particular scenes end. I think, in the sense of art, well, what is magic? I mean, when I was working on the Moon and Serpent Bubber book of magic with Alan, co-written, of course, by the late great Steve Moore, no relation. they arrived at, what is magic, and what magic is a way of communicating with one's consciousness, which is what art is,
I think
and
a
so
lot of what they're talking about is the imagination of the Romantic poets, because
yeah.
those dudes really believed, and women, sorry, but really believed that, whether it was through laudanum or some kind of ecstatic experience or whatever, that
Mm,
the imagination will create something as real as reality. You could take it
mhm.
the other way too, because of the faultiness of our senses or the subjectivity of our senses. We're never really experiencing objective reality. We're just experiencing our impression of reality. But anyway, whatever way you want to take it, I do think that's what more and more are talking about. They're not
Yeah,
really talking about magic. So when people say, well, Moore says he's a wizard or whatever, he's one of the most
exactly,
rational people you can meet because he's
exactly.
talking about imagination in the most comprehensive way. Sorry, go on.
Well, that's the thing, was I don't think I really said anything in my book that would negate what Moore was saying in the Bumper book, because
Yeah.
even if Moore's idea of what magic is, sure, that exists because consciousness exists. And if you want to consider yourself a magician who works in magic, I mean, be my guest. My only issue was the idea that it's sort of like what does the modern witchcraft movement do? They practice magic, but they call themselves witches, and it's kind of like, well, why don't you just call yourself magicians? Because the word witch has so much baggage, historical baggage, and I mean, getting into Gerald Gardner and people like Margaret Murray, who was a big influence on Gerald Gardner, who invented Wicca in the 1940s. Um, it's sort of built. The modern witchcraft movement is sadly kind of built upon really bad history, and also German Romantic nationalism, which hasn't produced many other good things. You know what I mean? There's some worse things than that. Um, I think it's just better off that if you're gonna just call yourself if you're gonna study magic or the occult, you just call yourself a magician. Also, a lot of New Age thinking invariably does kind of lead to eugenics, especially since both of them are based on Nietzsche. I mean,
That's really
the idea.
interesting. I didn't know about that. I've always just had a problem with new agey stuff. I was young and I'm old enough to have been young in the 90s when it was really full
Really big.
flush around me, and it always made me want to, stick my finger down my throat back then,
Yeah.
and it still kind of does. But
Well, the New Age
the
thinking does come
flakiness of it.
from, yeah, Nietzschean thinking has influenced both camps, which is why you get ideas in the New Age system, ideas of like star seeds or indigo children. This idea that with evolution, that evolution is about improving, but no, evolution is about survival. Evolution, people don't improve over time; they just stay alive. It's not like people are getting magical powers over time. It's bizarre stuff that still pervades. Um, but so really, if you call yourself a witch, you're not going to get any. I will call you one too. I'm not ever going to. I don't. It's not my intention to offend or outrage people. But please don't try to rewrite history. And there's still quite a lot of that. You know, a lot of people taking on the persona of so-called, long, uh, uh, yeah, like a group that has been abused throughout time and marginalized throughout time. And it's like, no, but no one has been calling themselves a witch since the 1940s. And if you've got that in mind, go ahead, reinvent it, turn it into something else. But don't fall back on really bad Victorian history, history and archaeology, because the truth of the early modern period, which is, the golden age of witch hunts. It wasn't the medieval period. It was the early modern period when you had the printing press, and it was just on the cusp of, it was like the mid to late 17th century into the 18th century. Those times are still really, really, really important to understand the truth of, without all this extra, this extra stuff. We need to just kind of appreciate and study the naked truth. However, however disappointing it may be, or how mundane it may be, like, oh, really? It's all up to just people who were accused of witchcraft not because they were over a cauldron cackling, but because they just owned land or had money or were, it's people are people. People are human beings are human beings.
Coming up, Ben's varying art styles in the book, who's really to blame for the Salem witch trials, how modern Salem deals with this legacy, and more. This podcast is part of the Deconstructing Comics Network, where we're grateful to our supporters on Patreon. Patrons get exclusive extra content. Pledge $2 a month or more and get Batman 66 podcast Bat Bits, where we've recently gone over an early draft of Rick Vollard's script for As the Bookworm Turns, and we'll be digging into a variety of documents from the files of William Dozier, producer of Batman and the Green Hornet, including his correspondence with Bruce Lee and more Season 1 Batman scripts. At $4 a month, you also get our monthly show Silver Age Batman, where I'm moving through the book Batman in the 50s issue by issue with a rotating second chair of Paul, Emmett, Patrick, or Kumar. Follow our Patreon for free and you can hear the first 2 episodes of both Bat Bits and Silver Age Batman. Check it out at patreon.com/deconcomics, and thanks for your support.
Do you like comics? The 1960s? How about middle-aged gay couples gossiping about their neighbors? Then you'll love Checkered Past,
a loving examination of DC's Go-Go Check branded comic magazines published from February 1966 to August 1967.
I'm Dr. Bob.
And I'm Dr. Husband.
And each week we'll be your hosts on a trippy tour through mid-century four-color madness. Checkered Past, available wherever fine podcasts are downloaded for free.
I think part of the movement towards Wiccanism, at least as I experienced it when I was young in the 90s, was also a kind of alternate feminism as a way for women to kind of claim a sense of power or history or agency.
Sure.
To be able to affect, control over some things when you feel a lack of control. And then also there are those matriarchal theories about pre-Christian cultures being more, maternal, and of wise women, and the snake being identified with them. Figures like Medusa, I think, are sort of, like a stock figure, like the witch. That can be be troubling, and there's a kind of power in that, and then can also be embraced because they'd have a certain amount of. But anyway, I want to go back to your art styles. How did you decide on the different kinds of art styles to employ for the 3 different eras that you flip back and forth between?
It was it was funny. I really wanted the 1692 bits, the 17th century bits, to be very rugged, inky, not thinking too much about perspective, just kind of freestyling everything. And I
was there a
wanted
reason for that?
Well, I wanted at least the 19th century stuff to be more realistic because it's post photography.
So I was kind of on the right track. The further back you go in history, the more cartoony it becomes.
The more things the more things that you can actually recognize in modern Salem, I wanted to get right. I wanted to get so I studied, photographs from the 1800s and took lots of reference pictures. But I had to redraw a ton. I mean, there's very few. I picked a really weird year. Like I picked like 1868 to have these characters walking through Salem. There's not a lot of pictures of Salem from that time. It was before a lot of buildings got knocked down and more, kind of Gilded Age era or 1870s. There's a lot of buildings and infrastructure in Salem. So I had to study a lot of maps and stuff to make sure that I wasn't drawing anything that came after 1868. I kind of, yeah. And then, of course, some things are more photorealistic, but at the same time, too, the building, the city's full of cars and, telephone poles and things like that, where I have to kind of fill in the bit, the places where these things are. And I wanted to keep the geography of the 17th century bits accurate. I still wanted you to feel like it was, because the street plan hasn't really changed that much. And I don't really know what it is. I mean, obviously the Longfellow and Hawthorne scenes are more surreal and bending physics and time and, and yet the more cartoony scenes are the very bleak, realistic, the bleak reality of everything. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's because we tend to cartoon. We tend to, speaking out of my ass right now, but is it really because we add a certain amount of photorealistic elements to fantasy, and then when we tend to think of the truth in the abstract, because sometimes the truth is too much for us to handle, so we have to kind of, any level of cartoonishness is kind of the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't really know. It wasn't really a thing that I planned and thought I'm going to do it this way and it's going to be for this reason. I did the book and now I'm going, why did I do it that way? Obviously there's a continuity that meant that in my head I knew that I had to do certain things a certain way, but I'm wondering what exactly that was in my subconscious that made me do it that way. I don't know.
Well, the color gradation must have been a conscious choice. In 1692, it's black and white. In 1860s, you're using a limited color palette, and in the modern era, it's full color.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's I do have to get at the motives of the young woman who accuse various people of witchcraft. And once again, here, I feel like you're not being ambiguous about it, because you got they're short, but you got a couple of scenes where, one of the characters says it's just for sport. And at one time, she even seems to say it in the trial itself, but yet nobody takes her seriously. There's another time where she's kind of faking being cut because she's stolen somebody's broken blade, and they discover this, and yet they just sort of chide her for it and keep going. And then later on, she's talking to one of the other women, and she's saying, she's getting worried about it, about the repercussions of what they're doing, and the other one's just full steam ahead, like so-and-so vexed me and I'm out to get them back. And yet a lot of people seem to be haunted by what they did. But to you, I gather, and in the book, there's no ambiguity about whether they were hysterical or psychologically possessed or self-delusional. This was calculated. Yes?
Yeah, in some, yes. Well, I mean, the bits that you mentioned, the scene with the knife and the we did it for sport, that all came from actual documents. You find that in documents from the time that they
even
said
when
that.
They're having the private conversation, like when, I forget their names, but I think it's Abigail wakes the other one up while she's sleeping and talks to her.
Well, that's me, but yeah. No, I wrote that. That's made. I wrote that. Yeah.
But you
It's a
must have
very
written it for the purpose of reinforcing the fact that this is something being done deliberately and they're fully aware of what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's that part of, the reason that I have all these notes in the back of the book, all those citations and everything, is because the truth is so crazy that, but that I needed to at least write down, I made this bit up, but this bit's real. And actually, the bit that is the least believable, no, that actually happened. That, 'cause the truth is always stranger than fiction. Um, yeah, I went back and forth with this with Emerson Baker. He wrote an amazing book in 2016 called The Storm of Witchcraft. He's a really great guy, really wonderful older gentleman. Has been studying this for a long, long time. As far as the afflicted girls, the afflicted children, as they're known, yeah, I think it's a mix. I think if you look at the household of Samuel Paris, where these accusations began, um, part of what made this such a scandal is that, this first instance of, this supposed outbreak of witchcraft begins in the home of a Puritan minister. That's not good. What the hell, instantly it was this thing that needed to be controlled and needed to be, nipped in the bud. All of this happened years out, a very short time after King Philip's War, which was which not a lot of people read about in school or know about, but it was a conflict in the 1670s and 1680s. It was the bloodiest war between English and European settlers and indigenous nations in New England. And by the time you've got the spring of 1692, a lot of war refugees have come to Salem Village, and Samuel Paris's home, like I said, where the first outbreak of these children acting strangely, his 9-year-old daughter Betty, but also his 12-year-old. They say niece, but might not have been his niece. Might have just been might not even have been a blood relationship to him. Abigail Williams, who was one of these refugees, who would have been completely traumatized. I mean, these were young women who would have seen some really horrific violence and would have lost their parents, and horrific, nighttime raids and things like that. You look at the home of Thomas Putnam, who is a very an unambiguous, at least in this book, kind of ringleader of everything, and a villainous creature in my estimate. He and his daughter Anne Putnam Jr. accused the most people. I mean, they accused so many people in that year together. But in their house was a woman named Mercy Lewis, who was also a war refugee. And so I kind of sometimes think that, these poor, traumatized war refugees who had nothing were now in the homes of these kind of in the homes of who are the two most, respected people in a Puritan society. It's either the town elder, like Thomas Putnam, or a Puritan minister like Samuel Paris. And I think they were I think they were having really bad episodes of post-traumatic stress syndrome that the other children, the actual daughters of these elite, well-to-do men who are also attention-starved and who are also looking for something to do, were looking at all the attention that these traumatized war refugees were getting. That's my theory. And then it became a thing where they were both
put on a communal play that they just sort of fed off of each other.
Yeah, I mean, there was still kind of something like that in upstate New York in the 1800s. I mean, the birth of spiritualism in upstate New York was these two women called the Fox Sisters, who claimed to be, hearing, knocking and things from spirits, and they would hold seances, and they became really, really famous. And there was a big split at the end where one of them was still maintaining that they were contacting the spirit world, and the other one was saying, no, we were just bored. We were bored women who weren't expecting, no one was asking us what we wanted to be when we were growing up. We were just expected to be fertile, obedient wives. We just wanted to have a little bit of fun, and it got out of control when adults took us seriously. And I think that's what happened in Salem.
Well, that's charlatanish, but relatively innocent in relation to Salem, where people were
Yeah.
being hanged, and they still
Yeah.
continue to make those false statements. But
Yeah.
it kind of sounds to me like maybe you blame more, or maybe are more angry at Parish, Putnam, Corwin, and the elder males of authority as opposed to
Yeah.
the young women. Is that correct?
That is correct, because I mean, I was talking about this with somebody, and they made the mistake of saying, "Oh, well, I mean, at least they were, they were accusing men of witchcraft. Well, at least they were, fighting the patriarchy." And I was like, "No, they were upholding the patriarchy. Who do you think was controlling these children? This was all, I think, very advantageous to people like Thomas Putnam. It became a thing that could be used to the advantage of certain adults. I'm not really that interested in the girls for that reason, because the girls didn't condemn people. I mean, they kept going, of course, but they didn't condemn people to death.
I guess the
Adults did.
person who orders so and so to be hanged, and the people who carry it out are the most responsible.
So as far as the motives of these girls that accuse people of witchcraft, that is still kind of a debate among historians of, like, is there a definite, like, one reason? I think it's a perfect storm of different reasons. I think different people thought that this would have a different, a beneficial, result for them. What I do, I mean, I hold more in contempt. I mean, the politicians and these high, Harvard learning, Harvard graduates, in Cambridge and Boston, who took this seriously and who had some reason for wanting this thing to go the way it was going. New England didn't have a charter. New England was trying to find its way into, retaining some sense of independence from the mother country, from the crown. These were Puritans, It's not like they had a huge rapport with the monarchy. After all, Charles I was executed by Cromwell, who was a Puritan. It's not like there was warm feelings between the crown and these Puritan fanatics on the other side of the Atlantic. As much as I don't really believe in, accurate or dead on comparisons historically, like in the end of the book, I did kind of compare it to when Donald Rumsfeld was trying to make a case for the invasion of Iraq in a press conference, and he said, well, absence of evidence doesn't necessarily mean evidence of absence, when talking about how there was no proof that there were weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
It is the same kind of thing in Salem, where, Puritanism was in this perceived decline. And these people, these high learned people and magistrates and clergymen in Boston and Cambridge were going, oh my God, what do we do? Jesus. Okay. Well, if the mother country can't know that Salem has taken up, that Satan has taken up residence in New England, because they're not even going to let us have any more rights or anything like that. So if New England is at war with Satan, then Puritanism has to be the denomination that comes out on top, because we've just been given a charter that allows, like, a voice to people like the Quakers, who we hate almost as much as witches, and Baptists and Catholics. These are all what next? The Antichrist. I mean, New England is no longer strictly Puritan. They were having this kind of crisis, and so as a way of trying to retain ecclesiastical dominance in New England, they're like, all right, well, we're at war with Satan. Well, that means that we have to do everything that we can to visibly be winning this war. And as a result, I mean, look at what they did. I mean, it's not like they made that much of an effort in really trying to make sure that these people were innocent. They really quickly just exterminated these people as quickly as they could to just control this and to control it before word spread to the mother country. And even, in once Governor William Phipps, this illiterate treasure hunter that we haven't even mentioned, who, created this court to try these people, once his own wife was accused of witchcraft later that year in October, he thought, oh, God, all right, well, I'm going to end the court now because my own wife has been accused. We can't have, I know my wife isn't a witch, so we got to stop this now. And he immediately started a publication ban where no one could write about this except Cotton Mather. Except for people like Cotton Mather, because if people just start writing willy-nilly about how innocent people were accused and put to death for witchcraft, God knows what happens if word of that reaches the mother country.
Yeah.
I hold those people more under responsibility, more contempt than these little prepubescent women that didn't really know what they were doing.
Yeah, I just had this vision of Rumsfeld and Trump and people like that using spectral evidence in court.
Yeah.
So I think you've gotten the blessing of the historians that you mentioned for your book. Do you anticipate what the city fathers of Salem are going to say about it?
Oh, by city fathers, you mean the dead Puritans,
Today.
or
No,
today?
because so much of your book is about how they've pretty much pimped out the legacy and the tragedy of what happened and just sold it down the river for, a few flashy trinkets and easy money. And
Well,
not to mention the comfort of the people who live in Salem now and their kind of dignity and well-being and the whole thing.
yeah. I take comfort in the fact that really nothing that I've said in the book hasn't really been said before. There's a great book that's for sale in most bookstores or bookshops in Salem called Salem Place Myth and Mystery and Memory. But I have the book here so I can get my friend Nancy Schultz edited it along with a guy named Dane Anthony Morrison. They touched upon the same stuff in that book. Didn't really catch much flack for it. I think when it's in a pop culture medium, however, that's I think when people start to really it gets their ire. I mean, there was a documentary in the 90s called Witch City being made that also criticized and questioned the Witch City brand, the dependency that Salem has on tourism and on Halloween tourism, and how it's not really regulated and people can kind of say whatever they want and rewrite history, and people leave the city with a kind of skewed sense of what happened. That's bound to happen, it's not the way I look at it is that it's not my job as a cartoonist to give people what they want or to give people the Salem book that they expect. It's not my job as a cartoonist either to infuriate people or offend people or provoke people either. But it's not my job to bullshit. It's not my job to
Sure.
just trot out the same stale, everything is just there is such a thing as a Salem book, things that are marketed and catered to that kind of aesthetic, that kind of market. And my book just isn't that, I tried to do a book that is is really me. It's from the heart. It's a heartfelt
Yeah.
examination of this, and a conversation I think needs to be had.
Absolutely. I mean, your ire for the choices that they made is palpable. And I
Hmm.
think that's some of the most compelling reading in your book. In fact, that could have been just a book in and of itself. And something I knew nothing about, the idea of how Salem chose to deal with the guilt and the legacy, the generational trauma of what had
Yeah.
happened, and this very kind of cynical choice to embrace consumerism and capitalism and to sell
Hmm.
itself in this very particular way, which avoids dealing with the past and yet at the same time pretends to deal with it. And I think, like, when I've written about, I'm Tamil, being Tamil, or my background,
Hmm.
um, it's hard for people of my background to read my stuff, I think, in some cases. But at the
Hmm.
same time, you're going to be really hard on a place you came from, which for intents and purposes is where you come from.
Yeah.
As opposed to if you're just looking at it through like the lens of sociology or history. And I could really feel that in the book. And that's some of the most interesting stuff because that's very present. That's as interesting as what's happening in African countries or in
Hmm.
India. That's unjust to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the kind of thing. The book was not that. It was not my intention at the beginning. It's not that I sat down
Sure.
and said I'm gonna do an anti-Salem book that people are gonna hit. No, it's my favorite city. Halloween's my favorite holiday. But
So
the
Salem
weird.
is your favorite city still.
Oh yeah. Oh, I love Salem. I love
Okay.
its history. I think it's a gorgeous, amazing place. I have amazing memories there. A lot of friends of mine, very dear friends of mine, live there. Um, but I just have this kind of I have to ask questions. I have to question would really all of this whole kind of Halloween theme park that it becomes every year, would any of this we're kidding ourselves if we're going to think that it's for any other reason other than economic desperation and bad history and poor um, education of the facts. I mean, we're just kidding ourselves. I mean, I think I said in the book that Salem has much to do with Halloween as Las Vegas does with Arbor Day. Like there really is. If 25 innocent people hadn't been accused of witchcraft and hanged in the city of Salem, um, a location in the city, by the way, which was intentionally forgotten for generations. It was only confirmed in 2016 because people wanted to forget about it. I mean, these are the questions that we have to ask. I don't think there's enough critical thinking in that place. And you know, yeah, I mean, I am a bit harsh, but it's one of my ancestors was, I have to think about too. It's part
Yeah.
of my family. It's part of my
Yeah.
own legacy. And so the whole rationalist, bit at the end too about tarot cards and all that stuff too. It's really just because it's just I wish there was more rational thinking in the place. The place where superstition won its bloodiest victory in America is also the same place where you're going to get all this new age stuff and where auras exist and where no, let's have a place of. Shouldn't the real legacy of Salem be questioning claims of the invisible world? Shouldn't it be questioning everything, and not easily being gullible or taken in when people claim certain things?
Yeah. In the same way, Berlin is kind of a testament to what happened during Nazi times.
Yeah, and you see, I mean, there are people that I respect, but who I disagree with, who think like, oh well, when when the 1992 memorial to the witch trials was finally uh, once these people finally had a memorial on the tercentenary in 1992, that's the end of the story, and everybody learned, and everybody's that's when everything worked. That solved everything. It's like, no, how many? I mean, not to be extreme, but like how many memorials to the Holocaust are in Germany alone? Like over 2,000, I think. And yet, what are we hearing on the news? We're still hearing about neo-Nazi groups coming out of Germany.
Sure.
So obviously memorials aren't totally the answer.
No.
We actually need to educate. We actually need to have ingrained in us the facts. That's me off my soapbox. I'm sorry.
Go ahead and drink. It's been an intense hour, I'm sure. Intense hour grilling. So you've been working on this, momentous tome for 10 years, and you just finished.
Yeah.
What's next? Another polemic? Do you already have something in mind?
I'm doing a work with my dad. That's cool. We're collaborating on a thing together called Plummet to Adventure, which is going to be like a little film plus a companion comic book. So he's been drawing it and I've been coloring it. That's been fun. I like coloring, and it's fun coloring his specific style. Other styles other than my own. It's cool. I am working on a second book. It's not.
Mhm.
It's more. It's more historic fiction. So I get to do lots of research and the stuff that I love, but it's not about like setting the record straight about certain things. It's more lighthearted, more kind of like a kind of. I tried to explain it to somebody. I was like, it's so far in my head as I'm working on it, writing it. It's kind of like Nosferatu meets Antiques Roadshow.
Okay.
I don't know, but even that isn't. But it's basically
you're going from the past to the present, and from fiction to actual archaeology or something like that.
No, I don't know. Well, it's kind of a horror book about folk art.
Okay.
Put it that way.
That
So
sounds
far,
really
it's fun. It's been fun it's a departure. I've been looking at a completely different time frame in early America, which is great. I get to write different kinds of dialogue, and not just 17th century stuff. It's refreshing.
You're great. Well,
Yeah.
is there anything else you want to add or talk about before we wrap up?
Let's see. Not really. I mean, I'm going to be doing I'm going to be at Small Press Expo in Bethesda, Maryland next month.
Awesome. How was SDCC for you, by the way? Did you get lots of people coming by and talking to you?
San Diego was really cool. That was my first con ever. So that was very surreal. It was kind of a baptism by fire to be signing books.
Not only that, but I've never been, and I've heard it's so overwhelming just to be there. Yeah.
Very overwhelming. I met Eddie Campbell and I gave him a copy of the book.
Fantastic.
And I signed it to him and I said, for Eddie Campbell, here is from hell's pedantic nephew.
Well, it's so funny because I just emailed him today because a friend of mine who's, from New England, I mentioned to him that I was interviewing you today, and then he mentioned to me that he saw on eBay this kind of document for Fox Studios where they kind of evaluated the merits of turning From Hell into a movie. So it's just a document that the guy's asking $200 for, which is too much. But I sent Eddie the link and I said, "Hey, have you seen this before?" He said, "I didn't." He replied, "I didn't even know that Fox was considering making a movie of ours." And another From Hell thing is, I just kind of window shop the comic card auctions. And this Wednesday, the weekly Heritage auction has a nice From Hell page. It's where Gull and Hinton are standing in the old church. And Hinton asked that question, what is the fourth dimension? And it's just beautiful because it's all the pews around them. And
I know the scene you're talking about. I can see them.
It bleeds
So
so
good.
well into your own parts where Hawthorne and Longfellow are walking and and kind of moving through time. But
Yeah.
it's already thousands of dollars, and by Wednesday, I'm sure it's going to be much more. So
No
you can
kidding.
look it
I
up
know.
if
I
you.
would also love. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, you were talking about being at Bethesda. Continue, please.
I'll be in Bethesda, and then on October 4th, I'll be kicking off the kind of Salem premiere of the book. At least I will be at the House of the Seven Gables
That's
doing an event
amazing.
signing
So they're at
October
least
4th.
somewhat welcoming of this book. They're not like we're going to run you out with pitchforks for doing this. That's great.
I can't say I didn't fear that when doing it, but
Yeah.
I think more and more there's more of an appetite for it's a city. There's got to be enough room in the city for another point of view. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And at least all your old friends will be there to protect you if they do get a little restless.
Exactly.
Well, I wish I could be there, and this has been a pleasure. I'm really glad we connected. I really enjoyed talking to you back in the winter, and
Yeah.
best of luck with this impressive deep dive into Salem's history. I wish you all the best with it, and I'm really looking forward to your next book as well.
Koom, thank you as always for your enthusiasm and encouragement. It goes a long way, I have to tell you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Check the show notes for a link to More Weight, a Salem Story on Amazon. Follow us on Blue Sky at Decon Comics. On Facebook, we have both a page and a group. Those are linked from deconstructingcomics.com, as is our YouTube channel, where our episodes are posted every week as videos of a single image. You can comment on our episodes on YouTube or on our site, or drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com, or talk to us. Click the Leave a Voicemail link on the left sidebar of our site. Are you making a comic? Send it to us and we'll do a Critiquing Comics episode about it. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. The music backing the promotion of our Patreon is Change by Jazar. Next week, Koom interviews Wahab Algarmi, author of Almost Sunset, a graphic novel about a Muslim American boy's search for balance between his family traditions and the demands of life in middle school. So, till next week, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.